have not left anything for people like us to write. I really enjoyed your book.
No, no. Thank you.
So, shall we start? Pinky, everybody is
Yes.
here. We
Yeah.
can.
Yeah.
Hello, and let's start, okay? Huh. Hello and
Yeah.
welcome. This is a very special show, and particularly, it is very special because the subject is very special. We are discussing today across the continent the book called Escaped. It has just come out. It's a wonderful book, and all the people who are interested in cases, in intercontinental cases, international cases, and also people who are interested in human life and life of millionaires and how it ends up in the courts. You everybody should read this, and particularly I think in India it will have a very special interest. So the authors, Danish and Ruhi, welcome. And we have a wonderful panel today. I think everybody is having something so special attached to their lives and career, that this 1 hour will be wonderful to debate and talk about this book and the subject around this book. So, Mick Brown, welcome.
Thank you.
Mick Brown is he's in a way known name because of his one story, and it broke internet. He found out Nirav Modi, and Nick is a very distinguished journalist, writes for Telegraph, and he has written also 5 books. And particularly, I'm very impressed to know that his new book is telling the Western people more details about Indian religions. So, Meg, welcome to the debate.
Thank you.
Then we have then we have a Toby Cadman, and my God, hello, good to see you here, because we would really like to know the most important aspect of this book, and that is law, and how this fascinating world of courts, and how rich people use this, and how country fights back, and how diplomacy, politics, crime and law, how they intermingle, and what kind of a stories it create, and we would like to know from you. And of course, we will be talking about Danish and Rohi, but we have a very interesting personality from Mumbai, Dalan Mohan Gray. He's a filmmaker, and he's quite famous now thanks to Netflix also. He was doing a lot of creative work, but the king of good times, and particularly his film on Vijay Malaya is really a big thing on Netflix, and people have seen it and enjoyed it thoroughly. So I think everybody is having a fascinating work behind them, and we would be very, it will be very engaging talk, I promise you. So shall I start with authors? So Danish, obvious question first. So tell me why this book and why now?
Well, thank you very much, Sheila, and thank you all the panelists. Very quickly, well, of course, as we all know, extradition cases have become very interesting simply because of the kind of people who are being requested by India, and also, of course, the law aspect. So the idea for this book actually germinated with Vijay Mallya's extradition case and the kind of interest it generated,
Yeah.
huge interest. So we were already writing and reporting for the Indian media, for Times Now, for The Wire, for Mumbai Mirror, and Hussain Zaidi, who is himself a well-known author, and also a very good friend, suggested that why not a book on extradition, having these cases, which is when we decided that yes, but we didn't want to, restrict ourselves to the recent cases. Of course, Malya and Modi are very big, so we decided to have a rather, the bigger picture, and that's why we looked at the extradition cases over the last 7 decades. And so, of course, the subject is very intriguing. It's also a bit surprising that actually not much has been done. In fact, I don't think there's any book per se on extradition itself. But because it's caught the public's imagination, you thought, why not use our journalistic skills? And we dipped into the British archives a bit as well to look into what entails in an extradition process. So yeah, that's how we said that we should take this forward and explore this issue through a non-fiction book, making it very fact based.
So, Ruhi, can I just ask you that because this case, some of the cases are still live, and sensitivity in India is very much, very, very much. People are rather, not just people, but the jailers in TR and Arthur Road are waiting for some people. So, tell me, isn't it a difficult job to write about people, who are right now in the hot seat?
Well, yeah, thank you, Sheila, for that question. Absolutely. I think writing this book has been intellectually stimulating, but also emotionally draining. In terms of the kind of cases that we've explored, and there are some cases about crimes against children. And I wonder if the jailers are actually waiting for those people to get back and not just Nirav Modi and Vijay Mallya. Um, but yeah, the public pressure and the focus that has been completely on Vijay Mallya and Nirav Modi have, I wouldn't say made this extremely challenging, but has also given us that um, desire and motivation to look at other cases and bring them into the limelight so that, extradition doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's not all about these two cases, it's about all the other cases that have emerged in the past few decades. And so it was challenging because we had to do a lot of research. A lot of this is not available in public domain. Our book is completely fact based, so we had to do a lot of verification, go to sources which would give us authentic information. And so it has been quite challenging. I mean, we set off to write about 60,000 words, and now we've written over 120,000. And it seemed that at one point the book sort of had a life of its own, and we had to tell each other that now we're going to stop and we're going to just get this done. But extradition is a fascinating subject, and you will hear from Toby more about that, uh, both
Okay.
in terms of law and public imagination. So it's been quite fun writing it.
So, Toby, if suddenly just imagine that internet goes, only even then I would like to ask one question for sure for this debate. Tell us, in India, we seriously want to know why all these charismatic, big, rich millionaires, why UK is a favorite destination. And I'm really seriously want to know that why nobody goes to Australia, Canada, America, why UK? What is so special
Thank you.
about it?
Well, I could tell you many reasons why England is so special, but obviously it is an attraction for the very wealthy, not just from India, but from all over the world. We see from the Emiratis, we see the Saudis, that they come to the United Kingdom for a number of different reasons. I think many of the uh, you know the billionaires that are in great film, a great documentary. I think one of the reasons why they come to the United Kingdom and effectively hide out in the United Kingdom is that they can see that the judicial system, unlike in India and other parts of the world, is not politicized, um, and they know that the UK courts are going to really scrutinize the requests coming from India, which they do, as we know. A number have been refused, and it's only in recent times that they've really started to take into consideration the position being put forward by India. And India has a lot of problems with the backlog of cases, the amount of time it takes cases to go to trial. There are very serious problems with prison conditions, and these are all challenges that can be raised that may not be successfully raised in other cases or in other countries. But I think that there are many reasons why people feel more comfortable in the United Kingdom, and it has become, or it is perceived to have become, a safe haven for some of the world's worst criminals, not just from your part of the world, but from all parts of the world. And but I do see that the way that extradition requests are being considered now is quite different to how it was before. But look, from my
How
own
it is
personal
different?
perspective,
How it is
Well,
different?
so first of all, they have the way in which certain challenges are raised to extradition are much more closely scrutinized. The evidence that is put forward. So for example, in the Deer and Rajada case, which I prosecuted, unfortunately not successfully, but the court found that there was a prima facie case based on principally circumstantial evidence. And it wasn't a failure on the part of prison conditions or the evidence. It was on a very, very narrow procedural aspect of the case. There is also the position in appealing is a lot more difficult now, taking the case to the High Court and certainly taking the case to the Supreme Court. And I dealt with a case several years ago that actually took 8.5, 9 years to complete, which was an American case. And you don't see that very often anymore. I think it is the High Court is scrutinizing these cases a lot more closely, and I think that's a good thing.
Right. I would like Dylan to ask you that do you agree with Toby's contention that legal processes are better? You have made a film on Mr. Malaya and he preferred UK as a escape destination. What do you think? Why did he do that?
Well, I think first of all, obviously, I have to defer to his expertise as a legal professional, and I'm a filmmaker, so I try to
Yeah.
stick to my knitting to the degree possible. I think, yeah, I would say there is a perception that the UK court system is more likely to give you a fair trial. Let's say. I think also that and I haven't completed the book, leafed through it because my copy came quite late in the day, but the people that we spoke to when we were making The King of Good Times, indicated that there was a fairly favorable situation in the UK for for people facing extradition to India in terms of, some of the factors that Toby had mentioned, such as prison conditions. That seems to be a recurring theme, that, there's hesitance to send people back to, facilities that would be considered to be inhumane in the United Kingdom. And I think with Malia in particular, it's unclear actually whether he had planned when he left India to remain abroad for that extent of that period of time that he has. And, if you talk to his representatives and his family, they would say he did not, that he was just taking a trip, and that, events in India started to overtake, forced him to change his plans. And he's somebody that had spent a lot of time in the UK. We interviewed his son and had many conversations, and he was sort of the gatekeeper to the family. And his son basically is a British person. I mean, his identity is that of an Englishman much more than an Indian. Currently based in the US, but it very much feels like an Englishman as opposed to an American or an Indian. So, there's a long history there for, I would not just Mr. Malia, but many of these other people. There's a comfort level, there's a cultural factor, there's a whole taxation issue, which is very important for rich people, that they could be non-domiciled. And, a lot of their ill-gotten gains can be sheltered there. And if you talk to people, many people I talked to in London, of Indian and other origins, will say that there's a vested interest in the United Kingdom to remain a very friendly destination for these types of people, because a huge inflows of revenue come to the country through that. So it's almost like there is a certain welcome mat perceived to be laid out for people like your Russian oligarchs, people from India, China, Pakistan, Africa, a lot of ill-gotten gains from every corner of the world, many of them former English colonies. It's sort of it's like colonialism is the gift that keeps on giving in many ways. And London has become, that epicenter of being a sort of playground for these people. And the sense is that not a huge amount of scrutiny will be applied. And if their countries want them back at some point in time, it won't be that easy for them to get them back. So, I think that if you put all those conditions together, and even things like time zones, what have you, Mr. Mali also has homes in many other places. He was also living in California. He was comfortable in many different places, but he wanted, he was continuing to run his business for some time, which was mainly an Indian business, which is much easier to do from a place like London because of time zones, because of the interconnectivity, because it's easier for people to get there for meetings. All kinds of factors like that also come into play. So yeah, London will. I mean, I remember when there was some discussion about the non-dom tax situation changing. I was sitting around a table with a lot of very, very wealthy Indians in London, and all of them were like, "How could they do this to us?" They felt betrayed. This was like, this is basically our playground. This is our backyard. We consider this to be. I mean, I was staying, in central London in the winter when I was making my previous film, and walking around and looking at all the apartments, which are basically owned by rich foreigners. Nobody goes there in the winter. Nobody wants to be there in the winter because it's cold. So there would be 1 out of every 10 lights on in central London, and these apartments around Hyde Park. Those are all owned by these people. It's been totally colonized by them. So yeah, it's a very, very attractive destination. Will continue to be so. And I think Mr. Malia probably is quite happy that if he can't travel, he loves to travel. That's why he started an airline. If he can't move out, I think he's probably pretty happy to be in London.
Interesting. So, Mick, as an author, I would like to pose you a question that you made that you found him out. Nirav Modi was in hiding in that apartment. But tell me, when you met him and when you released that news, broke that news, tell me what was your what? How will you draw his portrait? What kind of a person you found him?
I found him a very evasive person on my first acquaintance with him. I mean, the situation was that we've been obviously watching him for some time and to try and establish exactly where he lived and where his office was. And I can remember very vividly the morning that we finally decided, right, we're going to approach him now. And he came out of his office, and I was standing to one side, and he walked past me. And I said, I deliberately chose my words, Mr. Modi, so that he would turn round. If I just said, I'm from the Daily Telegraph, I think he'd have probably scooted away as fast as he possibly could. So he stopped, and I then introduced myself. And he looked like a man who'd been shot by a sniper from a neighboring building. He had that look of sort of shock and consternation on his face, and then very quickly went into, I suppose, high defense mode, where everything I asked him was no comment, no comment, no comment. Not only shot by a sniper, but I mean, all these metaphors come to mind. Rabbit caught in headlights, and I think that was how he was. And I was very surprised actually that he didn't try and get away, so to speak, quicker than he did. We found ourselves trapped in this extraordinary situation where we were on a side street in Soho, in the middle of central London, very, very busy. And he walked up to Oxford Street, which, as you would know, is one of the busiest in London. And I thought at that point he was going to just keep on walking, but he crossed over the road and stood there waiting for a taxi. And I thought this was a rather extraordinary response, because you're not going to get a taxi on Oxford Street at about 10 o'clock in the morning, which is when it was. And at one point I said to him, "You're not going to get a taxi in Oxford Street at this time in the morning." And he looked at me, and I then found myself bizarrely saying, "Can I help you get a taxi, Mr. Modi?" Because it was becoming rather embarrassing, this encounter. It was like something out of a Beckett play where I was asking the same questions over and over again, and he was just responding, no comment, no comment, no comment. And eventually, to his enormous evident relief, a taxi came along and he was able to get inside. But even then, because the traffic was so snarled up, myself and the videographer were walking along beside the taxi at exactly the same rate the taxi was going. And we knew perfectly well that he was going to, he lived only a few hundred yards down. He didn't know that we knew. But he then, when the taxi arrived at that point, he got out. And then he started to walk away, presumably to try and distract us from the fact that, of where he was living. And by that point, it seemed pointless following him. He wasn't going to say anything to us. So it was a rather extraordinary encounter. But I have to say, I had no idea. I mean, it was an exciting moment for me as a journalist, and there was that sense of gotcha. But I had absolutely no idea at all that it would create quite the stir that it did subsequently create. I hadn't anticipated that at all. I was very taken aback by that.
So, do you have your own view on this? What Toby is saying, that Britain, fugitives and this kind of people who escape their own country and make UK as their favorite destination. Do you think because Britain offers a better judicial delivery system?
I think,
Do you
yeah. I
think?
mean, again, I would.
But because
Like,
America also offers and many other countries offers.
well, like Dylan, I would obviously defer to Toby, who's an authority on this, which I'm not. But I think from what I understand of it, it seems that people have been able to come here, and as Toby pointed out, as Dylan pointed out, it's not simply fugitives from India; it's fugitives from all over the world who come here, and I think there's been a very much a policy of we don't ask too many questions, and if you're bringing in money, and this is no credit to the British government, but if you're bringing in money, then the questions perhaps become fewer and fewer. I think particularly in the case of India, clearly there are very strong historical links and very strong cultural links. And I think if you're Malaya or Nirav Modi, you would probably choose to be in a country with those links where English is the first language, and perhaps better than being in, I don't know, the Ukraine or think of another country where you might perhaps be seeking sanctuary. But it does seem as if, and again, Toby would know more about this. But is it called the Golden Passport, Toby, where people coming in have been given a sort of preferential leave to stay, basically, if they invest a certain amount of money. So I think that's always been a tremendous enticement. Yeah, a tremendous incentive for the British government. Yeah.
So, Toby, I have also reported in Delhi and in Mumbai, CBI, Central Bureau of Investigation, and some of the cases. And I do remember in the process of reporting that lots of people, rich people in India, get illegal wealth, and they deposit in tax havens. And most of the tax havens, banks in tax havens, are controlled by Bank of England. That is one of the reasons CBI officers told me that's why this many of people UK turned out to be a best favorite escape destination. What do you think? Is it because of that money route also?
I think there is the money route, but I think it's also what Vic was just saying, the the golden passport route or the golden visa route. It's very, very easy to come to the United Kingdom with immense wealth, and wealth which has been largely obtained through illicit means, and you are able to enter a banking system where there are not the same checks and balances that we would expect for a country governed by the rule of law. But there is also, as you say, there is access to those offshore banking facilities through the kingdom. We've just seen, just in the last last 48 hours, the British Virgin Islands now has undertaken to put in place a more robust system, because that is obviously a place of choice. You have Vanuatu as well, which is another place of choice. We know that through the case of Nirav Modi, there was a connection there. He was trying to obtain citizenship there through investment, and it's always coloured as legitimate investment. It's actually it's buying protection, and that's unfortunately what it is. We have, our group now is investigating Lebanese banking fraudulent schemes, and that is using the UK market, investing properties. I mean, properties is a great way to clean your money in London, unfortunately, in the United Kingdom, and that's something that really does need to be addressed. But I do think that there are a number of loopholes that people that have sufficient funds can exploit, and they do exploit. But I don't want to say that this all falls on the fault of the UK authorities. I think countries like India have to take responsibility that their own judicial systems and their own banking systems are not sufficiently robust. And that's why quite often when we look at the judicial system, that's why people are allowed to remain in the United Kingdom, because we can't get them back to those countries because of those concerns with the judicial system and political interference. So I think there is a lot on both sides that really need to be addressed. In countries like India, Pakistan, those countries in the region, they really need to develop much stronger and professional ties with the law enforcement and prosecutorial authorities, because there's not a great deal of trust.
India largely follows British judicial system. But I take your point there. Ruhi, what is your take? What do you think? Like, why Nirav Modi and others have gone to UK only?
Well, we have extensively written in our book about the properties that they own here, and as all three other panelists have spoken, right, from Dylan, Toby, and Mike, that there are opportunities to invest money here into properties through channels that lie in either the British Virgin Islands or Nevis, and through banks in Switzerland. So there's a lot of opaqueness around this. So Vijay Mallya owns his lavish Twin Village property, but you can't find his name anywhere on the property documents. So you cannot link it back to him and use it to, liquidate it against his debts. So this is a very important consideration, perhaps, for billionaires to move here, because they can see this as a way of laundering money, and Vijay Mallya does have an added charge of money laundering to his extradition, to his fraud that has been one of the charges earlier. So money laundering has been added to that. But having said that, I think there is a lot of weight that the UK judiciary puts on human rights, and these escapees are perhaps looking at those laws to protect them. Like in case of Nirav Modi, I think his major reason for coming here was one, that golden passport, so he could invest money here and he could get an easy or a quicker PR, which would convert into a British citizenship earlier than in most countries. But also, I don't think he ever expected to be behind bars, because for extradition cases, especially those involving fraud, bail is easy to get. And it was only the Indian investigative agencies who very smartly, and they should be, appreciated for this. And Toby was representing them for that case at that point in time, which was, I think, a brilliant move to introduce that criminal angle to that case that put him behind bars, which is something that neither he suspected nor his legal team, and it's also a red flag now for other billionaires to think about it.
Interesting.
In much more detail. So I think we'll see a lot of changes and perspectives as we go on.
Okay, right. Mick, you told us what happened when you found him, but why don't you share with us a fascinating story that how did you track down him in the first place?
Well,
Tell us the secret. Tell us the adventure that you went through.
Well, there's only so much I can tell you about that. I'd written a piece about Nirav Modi.
Somebody tipped you off?
Yeah, I did get a tip off. A tip off that he was running a business here in London. Okay. Because I'd written a piece about Nirav Modi. I guess this would be December 2018, November 2018, something like that. Yeah, when he already was on the run. And it was as a result of somebody read that and tipped me off that I should look into the fact that he was running a business here. And so and I have to give full credit here to Robert Mendick, who's the Telegraph's chief reporter, and who's a much more assiduous investigator than I am. And so from that single sort of seed, as it were, we were able then to establish from a high placed government source that he had a national insurance number, and one step led to the other, and we were then able to establish that he the whereabouts of his business, and to establish where he was living. So that, that took us some weeks to actually do that. And then once we've got the information, we then, of course, did what anybody would do, any journalist would do. We followed him for a little while and observed him for a little while to establish that he was living where we believed he was living, that he was working where we believed he was working. What was so extraordinary to me was that he was very much, if he was hiding in plain sight. He was there operating a business in the centre of London. He wasn't living in a crofter's hut in the Shetland Islands or something. He was very much in the swim of things. And subsequent to that, I was told by Indian friends here in London that people over the year had said, well, he was seen in a cafe here, or he was seen walking through Soho there. So I think I don't want to say that it was well known that he was here, but certainly some people seem to have tweaked to the fact that he was indeed living in London, because of course there have been all sorts of speculation, false sightings. I think first of all he was said to be living in New York. I don't think that was the case. I think he was here. And while it's true that he and Toby would know this better than I, while it's true that he did travel from London while he was here, he'd been based in London pretty much from the get-go, I think.
Interesting. Danish, can you tell us the crux of the matter of this entire extradition proceedings? What is your observation of this between whatever is happening between the Indian investigating agencies, UK's courts, and these fugitives? Tell us, what is the crux of the matter? Is it more about politics, diplomacy, law? What is it?
Well, it's a cocktail of all of that. And just to put things into perspective, India was also one of the earliest countries to get an extradition treaty signed with UK.
Right.
In 92, India signed that extradition treaty. It was ratified in 93. So there is a background to it. There is this involvement of both the sides to kind of have this transfer of criminals, fugitives to take place. But of course, that is an issue because, of course, as Toby said, and as Dylan pointed out, why UK is such a easy destination for these people. It's not that simple a process. So, of course, they will use everything possible to bar their extradition, which is what has happened. So there are different ways to look at this, which we, of course, cite in our book as well. So in Nirav Modi's case, for example, just to give you a very interesting example, he has repeatedly said that that if he goes to India, then he will not have enough money to access private healthcare if he is put in Arthur Road jail. But surprisingly, every time he has made a bail application, the amount for the bail goes on increasing, right? So last I heard, in his 7th attempt, it was £4 million, right? He's ready to give that much of money. So the issue is also about how the extradition treaty was set about. It was negotiated in the 1980s when India-UK relationship was on a different plane. It was the issue of the Khalistani angle was there, and India was very eager to have UK not emerge as a territory for the Khalistani elements. So, if we look around, that was the background to how and why the extradition treaty was signed. Whereas now, the issue is completely different, right? We have got a lot of financial fraudsters. We have got all sorts of crime. And, as Toby was saying earlier, it's very easy to get lost in the stories of Malia and Nirav Modi, fascinating as they are, and as Dylan's success in Netflix shows that people are more interested. But there has been a steady stream of people who have used UK as a base, and India has been looking to extradite them over the last 7 decades. And it has been some sort of a mixed bag. India has succeeded, but also failed. because of a variety of reasons. But they will continue to come. For example, in our book, we have a chapter on Iqbal Mirchi, and now we hear that the ED is now in the process of sending an extradition request for Iqbal Mirchi's son and first wife. So it doesn't seem to be ending very soon.
Right. Interesting. Then tell us something what we don't know about Vijay Malaya. Say, tell us something interesting aspect or personality trait.
Well, I'd say one thing that people often ask me why I made this film, and actually, it was not my intention to make the film. Netflix
Hmm.
approached me to do so, and they actually gave me a choice of films. And when I initially was, considering which of these films to do, the Vijay Mallya story was not one that I personally found that interesting. I'd been here in Mumbai when he was sort of at the apex of his notoriety, or let's say the first wave of of his notoriety. Um,
Right.
and I thought I sort of knew what he was all about. I mean, he seemed like a sort of a rich guy, very flashy, not particularly intelligent. His story seemed pretty much to have already been told. I wasn't sure that I could really bring anything new to the table in terms of telling that story, possibly to a new generation, because obviously, the people that are mainly watching Netflix, for example, in India, are primarily under 30. Then when I started to do my own research, I actually found the story to be much more interesting than I'd initially thought. I found him as a person to be much more interesting, much more multifaceted, much more well spoken. He speaks 7 languages. I watched some of his extemporaneous oration, which I thought was actually very impressive. He's extremely articulate. His thought process behind his, even his failed business ventures was very interesting. And I also, the way he has been sort of used as, I mean, I hesitate to use the word scapegoat, but the way he's been used as a symbol, let's say, uh, to, by and large, deflect attention from a really, really troubling system of, funneling public money into private hands in this country, is very interesting to me. And another aspect that I found incredibly fascinating was the whole love-hate relationship that India has had with alcohol. Even predating independence, but definitely post-independence. Then, Malia and his father are both representing different types of, different eras of Indian tycoons, pre liberalization and post liberalization. And then, India sort of moved on beyond the Malias into the Ambanis, etc., to yet another phase of Indian tycoonery. So, it turned out to be very interesting. And then also, one of the things that really struck me was that, when I was talking to people about doing the film, everybody I spoke to here in India, whether they were 18 or 80, was very, very eager to see a film on Vijay Mallya. And that is
Is
that
it?
is rare. That
Is
is rare, especially in the documentary world. Like, I mean, my previous films, I sort of had to convince people to watch. And they were happy they did. Hopefully, usually
so? Is
once
it?
they had done so. Um,
Yeah.
I would just say one thing to pick up on
Yes.
something that that we've been talking about here. One of the things that happened when we were making the film, and obviously Malia's extradition case, in a sense, is closed now. I mean, I know there are possibly appeals for asylum, et cetera, going on, and there's still the European Court of Justice as a last resort, which has, I think, only proven successful in 1 out of 200 or 300 cases in the past. So it's sort of a no-hoper. But when we were talking to off the record to people from the Indian investigative agencies while making the film, many of them were very unhappy with the way that the case had unfolded. And in particular, they felt that the case was being, to some degree, sabotaged by the Indian authorities themselves. And that raised a very interesting specter, whereby, you cannot underestimate the value and utility of having, to the Indian authorities, and I hesitate to even say government, I would say the Indian political class, because these stories, obviously have taken place with various political parties in power. There is a continuum of again, the real story here is the public money being funneled into private hands.
Exactly.
Some of those and some of that money then is kicked back to politicians, etc., political parties and individual politicians. That's a very, very lucrative system that threatens to bankrupt the Indian banking system. It threatens to, collapse the Indian economy. But it's a gravy train very few people want to get off. So there's a lot of utility in having a Nirav Modi, in having a Vijay Mallya, in judicial proceedings in the UK, and possibly getting off after a very long process and not being extradited. There's a lot of value in that for the
It's a
Indian
very
political
important
class.
point.
Yeah, so I just want to
Yeah.
point that out because it was
Right.
very interesting to talk off the record to people from those investigative agencies who were very upset because, first of all, they were upset because they felt like justice was not being served. Secondly, they were upset because they felt that their work was being misrepresented and they were being made to look foolish because of mistakes that were made during the extradition proceedings that were basically schoolboy errors. And I won't go into detail, but they felt that these things were being done on purpose by higher ups in the Indian political class and the authorities. So
But
I'll just
luckily, the
put that out.
judgment of the highest court has come in favor of the prosecution, and I think that makes the difference in this particular. But
Well,
I
we'll
would like
see. I mean, we'll see what happens.
yes, yes,
The proof is in the pudding. I mean, I think a lot of
yeah,
people in India would like to see these gentlemen, face trial here,
yes,
but
of course,
I'm not convinced
definitely.
that will happen. Let's see. Maybe
Agree.
I'll be wrong.
Uh, yeah, Toby, both the things you will. Can you please share your view, Toby? I think your mic is on mute. Yeah.
Sorry,
So
yeah.
tell me about
No, I mean,
Danish's view also, and about this very important point Dylan
sure.
has also told us. Yeah, please, Toby.
I mean, I think I'll start with what Dylan said first because I think he's
Yes,
completely right.
please.
The fact that these have gone to the highest court, the process is not over. By no means is it over, and I think it is looking increasingly difficult for India now. And this is where I risk making myself slightly unpopular, but I think it's looking increasingly difficult for India to be able to secure extraditions now. And I quite like what Dylan was saying with the process being sabotaged. And also what Danish was saying was this long history of the extradition relationship. And I think one case which is going to have a huge impact, which has not had impact yet, but will have a huge impact on all of these, is the case of Christian Michel. You've now got a UN working group decision that has set out a process where he was unlawfully returned to India. He's been sitting in a jail for more than 2 years. I can say this because he's my client, and it was also, you could see the politicization of the process that I was prosecuting the case of Nirav Modi, and it made the Indian government, very uncomfortable because I was also representing Christian Michel, and had made very serious allegations about Tihar prison, very serious allegations about the conduct of the officers in this case. And I think this is going to have a very serious impact. It's going to affect the British-Indian relationship on a government level. India, unfortunately, for the moment, have put their head in the sand as far as this case is concerned. And when you're trying to convince the courts, that the English courts, that there is a fair judicial process, one only has to look at the treatment of Christian Michel, a British national, to see that is going to be a very difficult thing for the Indian government to now convince the English courts. It's because this case is so political, and has a great deal of political motivation between Modi's party and the Congress party. As we all know, this has a long history. And we also know that the Indian prioritizes governments that they consider to be of strategic political importance. I think that's going to filter through into these extradition cases. And particularly if the Indian government completely ignores and refuses to implement the decision of the UN Working Group, that's also going to have a very serious impact. I can tell you that I've been in discussions with the British government recently over this case in particular, which they're taking up at the highest level with the Indian government, because it is going to have an impact on India's ability to get what I would like to say the real individuals who should be facing trial in India. It is seriously going to impact on their
Right.
ability to do that.
So we have read, yes, Toby, we have read these arguments, but first of all, he is accused in a very important case in India, and if he has been illegally, you are saying, handed over to the government of India, you should have the dispute between Britain and the Gulf country, not between India and Britain about Michelle, I would say.
Well,
And second thing,
just one
I would
second.
like to tell you in a counter way, because no, these are very. I appreciate your concern, but I would like to ask you, equally disturbing will be if Britain decides to give political asylum to Vijay Malaya. So all the governments are not above politics and above diplomacy. So please, you should also
So
think like that.
let
In
me
India, this is a very big. India will also wait and see, not just Indian government, the people of India.
let, let me answer, because
Yeah.
those are two very good points. First of all, I didn't say that the extradition was unlawful. The United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention said it was unlawful. So I'm of course his lawyer, so I wouldn't expect the Indian government to take my word for it. But certainly the UN Working Group has said that based on the evidence that's submitted. The second point you make is a very, very important point. Of course, it will send shockwaves if the British government were to grant Malia or any individual political asylum. But I've commented on this before. When you apply for political asylum at the end of the extradition process, when you have failed on every other argument, it is highly unlikely that you will succeed in being granted political asylum. I think it is highly unlikely that Malia will be granted political asylum. There are reasons for why the decision has not yet been implemented, and of course, the Secretary, who is very sympathetic to India, is considering very carefully the consequences of that. But you also have to understand there is a pandemic right now, and it would be quite foolish for the government to return an individual now into a prison where there is widespread infection in Tihar prison in particular. So I think you have to balance all these things. But my point is, and I don't want to take up too much time, but my point is that the Indian government has to think very, very carefully in how it treats the cases before the Indian courts in order to demonstrate to the British courts that any individual will be guaranteed a fair trial and will be held in conditions that are compatible with the European Convention on Human Rights. And that is a very important point to make. And India is now at risk of losing that after having convinced the courts over the last 2 years that they are capable.
Danish, can you intervene? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is an interesting point, and Michelle's case has taken a lot of press interest here in UK as well. But I would like to just qualify it also as a counter view to that is, first and foremost, India didn't give any assurance to UN, to UAE about his return. So one of the major bars to extradition is if a country does not keep their assurances. So far, as far as India is concerned, the courts here have consistently held that the sovereign assurances by India are acceptable and have to be accepted. So that's number one. A lot of extradition cases, it's also very interesting from the law angle. Almost all these people have used the case of Abu Salim, to show
Yes,
that
very
a
important.
person will be extradited, and then they will be also charged for other offenses, extra offenses, for which they were not sought to be extradited. Now the courts here have consistently not agreed with that point. Everybody, right from Vijay Mallya to Ravi Shankar, to the couple from Gujarat to Nirav Modi, they have all used this argument. So what I'm trying to say is that every case is different, and the British judiciary looks into the cases in its entirety, and also to the specific case that is come up. So, for example, about prison conditions, no one can say that the prisons in India are the best, but the court here has to look as per the assurances. If India says that this particular person will be kept in jail, and this is the feature, the cell will be of such a quality, it will have running water, it will have toilet, these are the light and ventilation, that's it. The courts go by that assurances. So I mean, I don't know how much of this Christian Michel case will be considered, but yes, as Toby said, it is indeed a very interesting observation by the UN.
So, yeah, tell me, Dylan. Tell me, Dylan.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in on this in terms of Mr. Malia. You know, what is very clear
Yeah.
is that he does not believe. I mean, he is a very intelligent man. He's got very obviously high caliber legal representation in India and the UK and elsewhere, I presume. He is convinced, as far as my understanding of it is, having worked on this film, that he will not get a fair trial in India. That his case has been so politicized, and I think those of us who live in this country are also of the understanding that the court system here is highly politicized. You know, I mean, we've seen many cases in recent weeks and months that indicate that the trend is towards increasing politicization of the court system here. That that the concept of the independent judiciary, particularly in high-profile cases, is really something that is you could put on the endangered species list in this country. I mean, I think that's something that's shared by a lot of people. So let's put it this way. The case, as far as I understand, the case is against Mr. Malia, having gone through quite a lot of the evidence, during the course of the making of the film. I don't know if any new evidence has emerged since we've completed the project. Is not an open and shut case. It's definitely not a slam dunk case, legally speaking, as far as I can tell. And that's an opinion that seemed to be shared by many of his legal representatives. So the fear is more that, I think if he felt he could get a fair trial, he would probably be quite willing to go and face trial in India, because, for him, actually, the type of person he is, being sort of cooped up and not allowed to leave. He's on bail. His movements are highly limited. For somebody like him, this is a really terrible way to live his life. I think he'd rather see the process come to a conclusion and continue his life, and he feels he has a strong case to make. But he does believe he won't get a fair trial, and that's why he's done everything in his power to resist returning to India.
Yeah, but Dylan, let me give you. I'm speaking from Delhi, but I tell you how ordinary Indian feel about this thing. That a rich man takes a huge loan from the bank and defaults on it, spends on unimaginary lavish things for ordinary Indian people whose money are in those banks, and then there is a country which boasts of a good judiciary system and supports extreme level of human rights of quote unquote criminals, and then we end up in this kind of debate. People look at this way. So please, Ruhi, can you tell us, when we no so ordinary men and women of India would like to know, how will Vijay Malaya and Nirav Modi will come back to India and go to jail?
If I could just respond quickly. I mean, first of all,
Sorry for very polemic question, but please,
yeah,
this is
no. When making this film and talking to people both before, during, and after the process, I was confronted with that question a lot. First of all, Mr. Malia did not take those loans. Kingfisher Airlines took those loans. A big problem that we have is that a very poor bankruptcy system in India has created a lot of these situations where creditors can't get their money. The Kingfisher Airlines has been out of business for a very long time, almost 10 years. So, the fact that the creditors have not been able to recoup at least part of their money is in many ways part of the regulatory deficit that we have in India. And if you're talking about Vijay Mallya being the sort of public enemy number one, I mean, he's actually pretty low on the list of people that have defaulted loans from the Indian government. Who gave the loans? If I'm going to a bank and asking for a loan with ludicrous, a sort of a case that I'm making, is it? I mean, somebody gave me that money. Somebody was instructed. Public sector banks, they're not. People are like, oh, those bankers should go on trial. These are not really bankers. They're public officials who are under extreme political pressure. So you have to ask yourself, who made the decision to give that public money to that person, to that company? Is it the person who took the loan? Are they really to blame? The person, if I have public money and entrusted in me, and I give it to some shady individual, I mean, I have to share the blame for that, right? I mean, the accountability is completely lacking.
Bankers have,
yeah,
bankers
and to call them bankers is completely wrong. These are public trusts. There's a huge amount of political pressure brought to bear. The interesting thing for me in this whole case with Vijay Mallya and Nirav Modi and many of these others is that the thing that nobody is discussing is you've not heard the leading politicians of the country say, we will make sure this never happens again. We will increase oversight of these banks. We will have a 10-step system to make sure it never happens again. And why is that? Because they have an interest in it happening all the time. They're making money off it. They're continually making money off it. The banking system is on the verge of collapse, as the expert in our film said. But, and they'll let it go to the verge of collapse and possibly beyond, because that is where their financial interest lies. It's always a case of follow the money. You can look at a Nirav Modi, you can look at a Vijay Mallya and their lifestyle and all their celebrity friends and say, oh, what a bad guy. And, it's very easy to excite the population like that. It's just like these oligarchs, these Russian oligarchs, they're built into the system. Obviously Putin has an interest. Every once in a while you have to serve one up. And many of those people will be caught in London as well. You have to serve them up to give the illusion that you're doing something to change the situation that you don't want to change. So that's what we're looking at in the Mallya case.
Rui, you have to answer this. Tell me.
Well, I mean, I have a lot of things that I agree with Dylan. He's researched into Vijay Mallya's life, and so have we. And you can see a sort of a trajectory where Vijay Mallya is a person who's always had really high ambitions. And every time it worked for him, he was elevated in society, in the business circle. Kingfisher was a huge gamble. And in retrospect, I won't be surprised if he regrets some of his decisions. But if Kingfisher had worked, he would have probably gone down into textbooks as a hero, and generations would be studying about him. But apart from all of that, there's been a fraud that has been committed, and there are cases that are going on that. He has raised issues of political vendetta. That is completely debatable, and it's courts to decide whether it stands or not. But what is very, very visible is this public outrage and media trial, which I think is doing more damage to the cause than, we've just turned Vijay Mallya into this model of extradition, and everything that happens with him is what happens with extradition. And that's not the way to go. I mean, it would be great if Vijay Mallya could be, brought back to India and stand trial. But then again, the man, when he walks on the streets here, get accosted by the people, he's called chore, and all of those things are, in a way, I feel, hurting the cause that, could have been gone through a very good judiciary system and taken him back. So he's using all of these things, the public outrage and media trial, to safeguard himself and to find a way to stay here. And these would be some of the things that he will raise in this asylum that might, in fact, work in his favor. So I think, we need to calm down and look at these cases. The investigating officers have done a brilliant job with his case. They've won both in the district court and in the high court. It's about getting that paperwork done, convincing UK to send him back on those charges, rather than create a huge public spectacle that might do more harm to India than good.
Mick, Can I ask you, in your country, average people, common man is interested in what is happening to Indian fugitives?
Uh, I
Is
think
it,
it would be wrong to say
is it
there was
an
it would be wrong to say there was an avid interest in it. But I think, yeah, I think there's some interest. I suspect that many people would take a rather cynical attitude to all of this, and be rather cynical about just how accommodating the British government have been to fugitives from justice. I think that would be the feeling. It doesn't speak well of what's happening here. Uh, I'm something that hasn't been raised in this question, and I'm very
Yeah.
interested in, and perhaps Toby would address this, is that it seems to me that Malaya and Modi just physically are in very, very different circumstances. Obviously, Malaya is there in his country retreat or in his London house or wherever, whereas Modi is in prison, where he's been for the last 2 years. It's probably a toss-up between which are the worst conditions, Wandsworth or a jail in Mumbai. From what I'm gathering from what's being said here, perhaps the jail in Mumbai would be worse. What will happen to Modi, Toby? What do you think will be the outcome of this? And is he likely to spend, if I mean his extradition has been ratified, he's now appealing against it. It's taken 4 years? The Malaya case has been going on.
Yes.
The Modi case has been going on for 2 years. Do we expect that Nirav Modi is going to spend another 2 years in Wandsworth? And what do you think will be the eventual outcome of that?
What do you think? What is your view? When will Nirav Modi be sent back by Britain to India?
My view,
I think-
I don't know, but Toby will have a view, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So, Toby, two questions to you. I'll just frame it again. You are a lawyer. You know everything about international law and everything about these cases. Just tell me in a very simple way, without politics, diplomacy, sophistication, when will India get back these important people in this? And secondly, also, please let us wind up. Can you tell us overall what is your view about this central point of issue that United Kingdom is, many people in India feel softer.
So first of all, nothing in international law is simple. So it would be
Yes.
impossible for me to give you a simple answer. In response to Mick's answer very, very quickly, the difference between Malia and Modi,
Yeah.
Modi was accused at first hearing, in which I dealt with it, of having destroyed evidence and interfering with witnesses, which is why he was in prison. There was not the same kind of allegations against Malia, but there was against Modi. So the evidence was strong. By ED had done their job in identifying that. So that was why, and he will remain. My view is he will remain in custody until he is extradited, and I do believe he will be extradited at some stage. But it's unfortunately unfortunately for the people in India, there is a process that you have to go through, and it takes time. It takes a very, very long time. And it takes a lot longer now that there is a pandemic. So I think the likelihood is that he will be extradited at some stage. It may take another 2 years. Malia could also be in England for the next 2 years. I mean, it depends on so many different factors. I mean, what Dylan mentioned earlier, I think, I'm sorry if I got it wrong, but I think Dylan mentioned it earlier about the European Court of Human Rights. Very, very few. It's a very single-digit percentage of cases succeed in the European Court to overturn extradition. And ordinarily, it's only to ensure that the state provides assurances. So I think for that reason, and you asked me not to be political. Unfortunately, I can't be, because extradition is by its very nature a political process, and politics play into that. And I think a lot will depend upon, and I'll bang my drum again because it's my client. A lot will depend on what happens to Christy Michelle as to how the courts in the UK now view the extradition process. So, but I do believe that Modi will be extradited. I mean, the allegations are very serious. The evidence is very strong, and all India has to do is ensure provide appropriate assurances that can be relied upon. But he'll
Very
fight it all the
interesting.
way. He'll fight all the way.
Right. Very interesting. Danish?
Well, yeah, as Toby said, he will try everything possible. And I mean, just few tidbits, the prison condition, the human rights, these are the normal, reasonings put forward by the defendants. And it's very natural that they will try and prolong it. I mean, in Vijay Mallya and Nirav Modi's case, there was something known as arrest by arrangement that happened, for example. We talk all about that in our book. And also, of course, we need to remember that these things they don't happen in a vacuum. There is a lot of diplomacy. There is a lot of behind the scenes work that goes on. So, I mean, as I can say, it all depends on what is the context in which these cases are operating. It is possible that Vijay Mallya and Nirav Modi might come back, but it's also the coronavirus. There are so many factors. But people, in difficult situations have also gone back. So there was an 88-year-old former police officer in Australia who was extradited from UK in the middle of the pandemic because the court said that he has to be extradited. So there is no one set template. And anything is possible. But yeah, it's a fascinating subject. And in our book, we look at these 12 cases, and the outcomes are very different. Lots of twists and turns, and it's a very interesting game of law, I can say. The arguments which is deployed, and how they try to stall their extradition.
We had a very interesting discussion, but let us give a last word to Lalan. Will you like to say anything? How you feel? Because I think in India, people are tired, frustrated, and feel that what is this? Criminals are running away with money, and beyond politics, there is a genuine feeling about these issues.
Yeah, and I mean, it doesn't. It's not that there's only one thing that's true. There are multiple things that are true. It is certainly very important that anybody that commits crimes should be called to account for them and tried in a fair and speedy manner. But at the same time, you also have to look at the systemic side of it, which is a very, very important issue here. If you're talking about the financial fugitives, because it's not that there's equal justice applied to all. The biggest so-called borrowers, defaulters, nobody in India knows their name. And coincidentally, many of them are extremely politically connected. In fact, all of them are politically connected, even Nirav Modi and Vijay Mallya. It's just that their political connections, ran out at some point in time because they probably put their money on the wrong horse, let's say. But those at the top of the food chain who are getting most of the public money and continue to do so are going to be, by default, very, very well connected. They're leeching huge amounts of money out of the economy. Unfortunately, people in your profession are not telling that story, because it's much easier to tell the story of a Vijay Mallya in his flashy suit, or the diamond merchant, who gets tracked down in the streets of London. It's an easy story to tell. Unfortunately, the news media here is very complicit, very lazy. I'm happy that Danish and Rui have written this book. I hope people read it, because they're doing the kind of work that, unfortunately, and Mick is doing the kind of work also at the Telegraph, that Indian media is not doing. I would say the biggest villain in all of this is probably the Indian media not doing their job and telling the story they should be telling, because it's a game of distraction. You follow these colorful. You follow these colorful characters, but in the meantime, there's a huge scandal, a huge potential tragedy happening, right, next door. It's the elephant in the room. That story is not being told. So I wish it would be. I hope that you and your colleagues will start telling that story with equal vehemence and equally loud voices.
Okay, Darren, but there is one difference I will have with you, is that Indian media rather covered too much both the cases, I would say. Please.
I'm not talking about the cases. I'm talking about the situation is not being covered. I mean, believe me, I know, because I've been working on this for a long time. Yeah, but
Okay,
it's not being covered. Where are the
last,
TV, where are the TV debates? Where's the long form? Where are the multi-part stories in the newspapers? The TV
I
debates
understand
about
your
the
point.
actual topic. Where who is being held to account? Nobody in your profession in this country, or let's say 99% of them, will do anything to avoid speaking truth to power. That is what is called for right now. Somebody has to speak truth to power because the country is on the verge of being bankrupted. It's not by Vijay Mallya and Nirav Modi. These guys are small fish in the grand scheme of things. By all means, let them be punished. But
So
the speak
Ruhi,
truth to power. Please tell your colleagues. I mean, this
get
is
your
what's
point,
missing.
Darren.
It's authors like Danish and Rui and documentary filmmakers like me that are doing it. And people in other countries like Mick, doing their job. In the news media. You all are dropping the ball. I'm sorry. That's how it is. That's how I see it, and I live here.
Get your point. Thank you, Ruhi.
Yeah.
Last word, Ruhi. Let's
Yeah, I mean,
end with
there's a lot to
yours.
agree with, right? We do need the media to do the role of, overseeing what's happening in these cases. Vijay Mallya and Nirav Modi got the eyeballs, got the media attention, which is why they were literally really great templates to follow. I mean, the evidence that was provided in the court, the corroborative evidence that came with that, every witness that went into the court, we wrote about it and the media covered it in many, many different ways. There were debates done on this. But what happened with the other cases? RTD Kaval Raizada, who kidnapped a child, murdered him, allegedly, for an insurance payout. What happened with Ravi Shankar, who was alleged to have stolen defense secrets? And that's huge. And there are lots of people in the top brass that could be involved in this. And that is a debate that needs to take place on Indian television, in the newspapers. There are some journalists who've done fantastic work, but they were a niche. So I think journalism needs a sort of a revival, but it also doesn't need to focus on these flamboyant billionaires and just their lifestyle, but also how these crimes happen, who are the invisible forces behind these crimes, that make it happen, and the other smaller cases, because there's a lot we can learn from that, and there's a lot that needs to be discussed in the public discourse and the media discourse as well. So I think there's a lot of scope to do here, and there's a lot that India can do. We've realized this, that if you have the will and you bring in great paperwork and on time, you can win cases. So, India
Thank
can
you
learn
so much. Thank
on
you.
that.
So Mick Brown, Tawik, Kadman, Danish, Ruhi, and Dalal, interesting talk, and thank you so much for joining for this debate. Wishing you
you.
all the best for the books. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
And also, Crossword Bookstore, crossword.in has the link to the books. That's what I have been told. So anyone who's interested can log into crossword.in, and also on Amazon and other places to buy their copies. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Goodbye.